There's no reason that I've heard today or in the recent months that would give me any pause for a reconsideration of where we're at as a council, where I'm at as the mayor, and where we're going in terms of this process. We need to stay the course and keep firm and clear. Right, Councillor Cathy.
I'll start with the legal advice, which I've read really carefully, and I keep coming back to a sentence on our page 5, which is the 4.4a. And the legal advice of Meredith Connell is that, as such, we would expect that the Chief Executive would permit the Council and its officers to belong to organisations with broad public interest goals. Broad public interest goals, not antithetical to the Council, and not to organisations with specific private goals to oppose or advance particular Council projects. Broad public interest goals. If you go onto the Property Council's website, the Property Council is the voice of commercial property in New Zealand. They have a manifesto. It's very clear on every page on their website that says they want RMA reform, which we would not support, and it's looking for local government reform. The thing that you haven't addressed, so I think I've got actually a legal basis for supporting this that you've given us, but also the thing you haven't addressed, and neither has the Mayor, is that I'm very clear about the Auditor General's guidelines. Perception of bias or perception of conflict of interest is the same as conflict of interest. And there is a perception out there that we are far too aligned with the development community. And if we can somehow redress that balance, and you're saying to us, no, you can't because you're not going to get to vote in August. Well, actually, I'm really intent on doing that. I want to exert some authority over what this council can and cannot do. And forgive me if that's a slight on the Chief Executive, it shouldn't be taken as such. So I want to take some control back. And this would be one. Now, the question is, why has Water Care Services Limited never been a member? They don't ever have to face this because they are pure, and that's the way this council should be. Because the goals are not aligned, and that's what the advice is you've given us. The Property Council is for the commercial property voice of New Zealand. We're a council. The ratepayers pay our salaries. So our main concern is the voice of the people and the little communities across Auckland. And do you see them being aligned? I'm looking at you, but I'm not asking for an answer. Is there any alignment there?
Mr Mayor, point of order. I don't know who Councillor Casey's debating with, but she seems to be speaking in that
I'm kind of looking there just because it was your advice. I don't mean you. They know that, George. That's not a point of order.
That are speaking to, surely.
Okay, Councillor Cathy, away you go.
You put me right off.
Councillor George, she's generally debating, but I think she's asking rhetorical questions that may never get answered.
That's right. I'm not asking. I'm just putting them up.
So
for
it's
me,
just,
I'm talking to you now, George.
Yeah.
For me,
don't talk to George.
It doesn't work. The advice that Meredith Connell's given is that we shouldn't be in the Property Council because the goals are not aligned, and there is a public perception of bias. And that's what this is addressing. So it's take back control and say, actually, we should take the Water Care Services line and stay well away. And that's, if this fails, it's going to the Auditor General. Because I don't think it's appropriate. So.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Cathy. Councillor John Watson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I agree entirely with you. I think this is a very simple and straightforward matter, and it's really informed, I think, by this conflicts of interest publication put out by the Auditor General, in which Meredith Connell actually referred to in their legal advice. They quote from that, and I think that's got everything that we need to consider in this decision. The Meredith Connell advice quite understandably repeats numbers of times that that their advice is in a legal sense, does not in law, it underlines legal. It's at great pains to point out our lack of compromising ourselves legally in terms of the advice that's been put forward. But I would suggest that that's rather selective. If you read Part 5 of the Auditor General's section on non-pecuniary conflicts of interest, which is what we're essentially dealing with here, and there's some very key words. This is different from what Councillor Lee quoted, and this is directed to us. This whole publication is directed to members. That's you and me. And it says, and it's just a couple of very key points here, in terms of bias, the question is not limited to actual bias, but relates to the appearance or possibility of bias. So that's point number one. It doesn't have to be real bias, it just has to be the appearance. Believing yourself to be not biased is irrelevant. That's irrelevant. Here's a key phrase. The need for public confidence in the process is paramount. I'll say that again. The need for public confidence in the process is paramount. Paramount being the key word there. Perception can be an important factor, and another important statement, each case must be decided on its own circumstances. And I would say this case is a distinct one, is a unique one. I have no idea what the Property Council's submissions have been to the unitary plan. I wouldn't have a clue, and nor do I have any intention to go and see them. So I can't, anyone can be accused at any time of conflict of interest. We've been told that numbers of times throughout the year. We seem to be getting told it a lot more often in the build-up to the unitary plan. So people can accuse you. The onus is on them to prove a conflict of interest. I don't know what their submissions are. I can't therefore be accused of having some bias against them through the unitary plan process. But what I can be accused of is not fulfilling my obligations under the outline of the Auditor General, which goes beyond that purely legalistic interpretation that was drummed into, throughout the legal advice we got from Meredith Connell. I'm going, and I suggest most people here should consider, is public confidence in the process, and Councillor Lee referred to the pub test, the RSA test, or whatever, any other test. Well, of course, if you're a membership of any organisation, any group, you know, particularly one you're paying nearly $40,000 to, and you're considering their applications, and that's the other point that's made here, the points where a situation, a risk of the sorts of decisions requiring a formal statutory process and hearing. That's what the unitary plan is doing. So this is the very case that people should be taking a very careful consideration of public confidence and appearance. And that's not what's covered off in our legal advice. It goes in a very, very narrow legalistic view. So in the pub test, or the test of public confidence, public opinion, it is very simple, Mr. Mayor, as you said. I believe that to be a perception or appearance of bias. Simple. I'm going by the advice the Auditor General has given me as a member, and I'll be voting for the motion accordingly.
Right, Councillor Dick.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy that this hasn't turned out to be a vilification of the Property Council, because I think the Property Council is a very, very good organisation which does a lot of good work. There's no question about that. And I personally have a very good relationship with a number of members of the Property Council, and including the Chief Executive, Connell Townsend, a very fine person. But do I believe that the Council should be a member of this organisation? No, I don't. And the reason for that is we could simply get all the rights and that we could do a lot of things without being members. and I believe that that's the road that Watercare Services Limited have taken. They are not a member of the Property Council, but they have very close relationships with them, and we can get reports done, we can get research done, and pay for that on an individual basis if we need it, as work needs to be done. So I just wonder whether the chief executive or third-tier management who made a decision, or whoever it was, made a decision that we should join the Property Council, may have actually looked a little further out and recognised that this was the term in which the unitary plan decisions would be made, and perhaps thought that it may be a good idea actually not to be a member of the Property Council. And you know, if we don't, I know that if we don't become a member, we may not get to play at their golf tournament, but I think that's something that we probably could do without anyway. Look, I'm glad that we've been given this list of the 250 odd organisations that we belong to, including the UK Institute of Archaeology and the Early Childhood Council and a whole bunch of others. And all due respect, Mr. Mayor, 99% of those groups, the 250, will not be lobby groups and will not be lobbying us. And if you don't believe that the Property Council is not a lobby group, I would invite you to look at the op-ed piece that was written on the 15th of February, just before we voted on the out-of-scope zoning, by the president of the Auckland branch of the Property Council. Lobbying comes in many forms. It doesn't come just as a phone call or as a cup of coffee with somebody or whatever. It can take the form of an op-ed, very critical in the of councillors. And I don't, not unlike my colleague Councillor Walker, I have no problems with somebody being highly critical of this council or me as a councillor, as a decision maker. So I don't have any problems with that, but recognise it for what it was. It was certainly an attempt to influence members of this council. So it was a lobby. And like Councillor Lee, I did wonder if it could have been written by our own comms department, but I stopped wondering that when you told Councillor Lee to stop wondering. So I'm no longer wondering about that either. But I do wonder, in fact, if it is appropriate for a regulatory body to be a financial member of an organisation which engages heavily in lobbying of this council. And so this is not a criticism of the Property Council, but it is a criticism of our membership of that body, and we could certainly get all the advantages of being a member without being a member.
Right, councillors, look, we've had three speakers for...
Motion be put.
You move to put?
Yeah,
Okay.
I move the motion be put.
Okay, we've got to move the motion be
By
put.
division,
Mr Mayor, I'd like to have the right of reply, which is normal.
You will actually get the right of reply on the basis that we put the motion, all right? So the motion, to put the motion has been put and seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
Okay, it's carried on the voices. Mike?
Mr Mayor, this is very much like the notice of motion proposed by Councillor Quacks and Councillor Fletcher at our February extraordinary meeting. It is about fairness and due process and a level playing field. I have to say that I am disappointed in the legal advice we've had today, if I may say so. Not so much with the content, so I didn't agree with all of it, but simply, given the sensitive nature of what the legal advice was about. That Meredith Connell did not make a declaration at the outset saying, we are members of the Property Council of New Zealand. Our advice must be taken into account with that fact known.